One of the best parts of model railroading, or any hobby for that matter, is sharing your journey and experiences with others. It's socializing, it's important. And there's no better a place to prove that point than the Models and Hobbies chat on our Discord server. It's by far the most active chat. But not everybody's on the Discord server. Some people don't use Discord. Some don't know our server exists. Some don't like big servers. Whatever the case, I don't want to force people to join the Discord to join the fun, but with how much joy and creativity we all share in this hobby, I want to give as many people I can a spotlight to share their passion. And, well, I've got a YouTube channel. What better a place to showcase than a video for the whole internet to see? Today, we're not looking at my models, we're looking at yours. Now, last time we did one of these showcases, we got 22 submissions. This time, we got 80. So, just as a little reminder, if you don't see your submission in this video, that's because the showcase has been split into multiple parts to spread out the workload. Speaking of which, a few community members actually volunteered to help with this video. I'd like to thank aide, RPG, and KDS for their contributions towards this showcase. They've each taken a bit of the workload off of my shoulders, making this project much less of a logistical nightmare. With that all said and done, let's dive straight in. Let's see what you have today. First, we've got an engine from Kriz. This engine here is 2911, also known as Old Gal, since she's the oldest of my HO fleet. She's a River Rossi / AHM Light Pacific, personally I call them Simplified Pacifics, upgraded to have full River Rossi Heavy Pacific specs. The Old Gal has been through a lot these past 4 years of me owning her, but she still holds up strong as my personal favorite. In August of this past year, she had a complete overhaul, granting her a brass water heater and a full repaint from boiler to tender in my Fictional Railroad navy blue colors. At some point, I plan to upgrade her motor and give her the ability to work on DCC. You know, I feel like I've seen a lot of British locomotives and paint jobs like this one, but not so many American engines. Seeing what you've done here, that's a shame. This is a killer paint job. Following that, we have a decently chunky submission from Quincy. This is the Addlestown Central, a small freelance 5x18 scale layout. Now, this layout used to be a whole lot more grandiose, but with the plans I have for a much larger layout, it had to be demolished and toned down. The minimum curve radius I use is 036, while the maximum is 048. The 048 area has a canyon surrounding it, which originally used to be a tunnel. There's a small engine yard next to the canyon with a capacity of 2 locomotives or a couple of freight cars. There's a Lionel number 96 coal tower in the engine yard, which can operate but isn't in use right now. There are a few buildings on the layout, but most of them are Christmas themed just because it's what I've got. There are 2 stations, one per each side of the layout, with one being on a siding and the other just on the main line. But enough about the layout, let's talk a little bit about rolling stock. I have an MTH nickel plate road number 599, which in real life was an H-60 class USRA Light Mikado. This was my first scale engine in my collection, and my favorite. I also have Lionel's Norfolk and Western 417, which is an Alco C-420, which is my second scale engine, and the last thing I got from my local train store, which sadly closed down last August. I plan on weathering both of them later down the line to kind of represent what they would have looked like in the early to mid 1950s. You know, I won't lie, when I read small 5x18 foot layout, I spat out my drink. I'm more used to 3x4 feet being small. With that said, yeah, I can see why you'd call this small. I like the track plan though. There's something charming to its simplicity. Same goes for your selection of locomotives. I like the Pacific, and the C420 is a cute diesel. It'll be fun to see how you weather these, especially since you've done such a nice job on a few of your cars already. Up next is Amtrak Pepsi Can. This is my very, very tiny fictional railroad, the G&W. The line is solely a bridge line connecting the railroad of my club, the SFR&M, in Virginia to another club member's railroad, the BSRR, in West Virginia. This short line is mainly called the Virginia Bridge because it's faster than using the main lines of the Virginian, Norfolk and Western, or Southern to get from point A to B. The roster is pretty small, consisting of a former P&W 040 number 9, an ex-New Haven 060 number 83, former ABPF 460 number 210, and a former Maryland and Pennsylvania 280 number 43. Each of these engines still hold their former reporting marks because the G&W is too financially unstable to re-letter them. Most of the engines in this picture are in progress of getting DCC sound installs and will be ran on the SFR&M interchange at my club in Deerfield Beach, Florida. Ooh, that's fun. Your club actually has a small interchange you can run these at as dedicated engines for the region? Nice. Is this just a generic interchange on the layout, or was it specifically made for club member railroads, or maybe even for you? Love the paint job on that 460, by the way. That's pretty. Next up, we have Chessie Fan. These two photos are work-in-progress N-scale layout that I've been working on. The layout is going to be based on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. Main reason for this is because I had inherited a lot of N-scale track and locomotives and rolling stock from one of my uncle's layouts that was taken down. A lot of the locos and cars need to be fixed, as most of them are missing a few parts or the motor won't turn over. I know that I didn't share many pictures, but that's because recently I haven't had much time to work on the layout, but when I get the chance, I will happily share more pictures of my progress. Cat. This looks like a great project to practice scenery with. Sure, it's not the most operationally complex, but it doesn't need to be. I hope you're having fun with this, and I can't wait to see an update in the future. Next, we have a small selection from Labo. I recently decided to do a little world building in my HO/00 layout and decided to build the railway's number 2. It's currently unpowered, but I plan to power it with an N-scale chassis. I also recently built a truck for it to pull. Where's number 1, you might ask? Well, I simply haven't built it yet. In lore, only 3 out of the original 11 engines for my railway still work today. Locomotive 1, 2, and 5 survive to this day. 3 and 4 broke down and were never repaired. 6 derailed into a river and was never rescued. 7 had a bridge collapse beneath him. 8 went to work at a dock somewhere else. 9 and 10 crashed into each other. And 11's been missing for a while. Man, with how ill-fated most of your locomotives are, I'm surprised you don't have a number 13 in your fleet. World building is such a fun part of this hobby. After all, this certainly isn't the only submission today with a pinch of lore. Telling the stories of the engines you don't have, and why you don't have them, is a clever way of growing your railroad without actually having to model that. I like that. I might have to take a page out of your book. Next up is Train King. This layout is an older layout I tore down around 3 months back. The layout was based off of several prototypes such as the Chicago Northwestern, Rock Island, and Milwaukee Road. The town name was Seymour, after my grandpa's hometown, where the Rock Island and Milwaukee Road used to run through. This layout was severely outdated. I couldn't run larger power at speeds, and it overall had electrical issues. So I decided to tear it down to make way for a bigger layout, which will consist of a full layout winding around the entire room. It'll be based off of the Chicago and Northwestern and Rock Island in Iowa. I mostly run 50s era freight on the layout with my older power, which mostly consists of my Milwaukee Road S3 261, which I got from a train show. It's always sad to dismantle a layout, but hey, a whole room setup? Dude, that's gonna be pretty awesome with the kind of diesels you have. And hey, you could always use 261 for excursions, just like the real thing. Speaking of 261, I love the way she looks. I'm kinda surprised she's not brought up all that often whenever 484s are discussed. I feel like more people would be talking about
the Milwaukee Road.
Up next, we have Battle 604. This is a model of a custom USATC S160, nicknamed Johnny. The model originally started out as an older Bachmann Reading 280, painted up as a Santa Fe locomotive. When I first started making our custom, they turned out pretty crude, but at the start of this year I decided to rebuild my S160 model. First I started work on the tender sanding and filling in the gaps. After that, I did the main body shell, filling in where the old headlight used to be. Then came a fresh coat of paint and the yellow accents on the locomotive and tender. As of now, the model is finished, but I plan to maybe add some small flagpoles to the sides of the headlight at some point, and eventually I would like to make a whole video documenting the build process. I don't know why, but I always love engines where a headlight has been moved or added. It's not the hardest thing to do, but it can be a little scary at first, and it's a good testament to someone's dedication. And this turned out pretty nice. It looks like the original. Maybe I need one for my own fleet, This next submission is uncredited, but pretty cool. Got hired by a local town to do a pair of Christmas layouts for a public event. Sadly, I only have the one photo of the trolley line, but the Steam layout got much more attention anyways. Dude, you got hired to do this? That's awesome! I know these layouts are a little bit simple, but I'm jealous. That sounds like so much fun! And you're getting paid? Next, we have a few engines from Seaboard. My layout is only a 4x8 sheet of plywood, but it has a lot of potential. One day, I hope to expand my layout. I'm always looking for new items to add to my collection, as well as room to expand my operations. I have a sizable fleet of both steam and diesel engines, and most of them have DCC and sound and run pretty well. As someone who also has a fleet that is mostly sound is an addiction that is definitely worth satisfying. Nice fleet you got there. Next up is Random Engineer. My layout is the Tennessee Overland Logging and Heritage Railway. The railway's owner will take any train he finds cool and buy them for restoration, from NW2s to USRA 060s and even pioneering era 040s. If he thinks the engine looks cool, he will do whatever he can do to get it running. The railway also doubles as a logging line to help fund restoration projects, and passenger excursions are run on rare occasions. This was my first ever attempt at making a layout, and despite its simplicity, it's been really fun and I'm proud of the end result. I've also started naming the engines, such as Drake, our 462 Pacific, Blinky, the NW2, or Minuteman, our designated crane engine. Yes! More people naming their engines, let's go! I feel like this piece of lore is just a summary of what most of us are like when it comes to models. I like it, I want it, I buy it. Critiques were requested for the submission. The biggest thing I'd recommend is replacing the straight tracks that have concrete ties. It's not much, but having only wooden ties is a nice way to make the layout a little more visually consistent, you know? It also wouldn't hurt to add a few more buildings to help make the world feel a little more lived in. Even if you don't have the roads going to them, there's an implication that they're there, and it really helps to bring the world together. Next is NSSR, who has this to share with us today. Work in progress on my new layout. I hand-painted the FP7, and am awaiting on more buildings for the layout. I'm planning to build a trestle that connects to the layout and goes behind my desk. You know, I didn't actually notice the FP7 was hand-painted until you mentioned it. Nice job, looks good. This is, like, the perfect start to a model railroad. You've broken the curse of the junk mountain railroad and made something pretty nice here. And if this is just a work in progress, I'll be excited to see what more you do. Up next, we've got Star Tugs. This is my new Midland compound, lettered for the London, Midland, and Scottish Railway and made by Hornby. I ordered it off eBay on Christmas Day, and to go with it I ordered a Bachmann Red Express coach. The coach, as of the time I'm writing this, which is in mid-January, hasn't arrived yet. I do plan on getting more Hornby stuff to go with this, so maybe expect more sometime. Other than that, I hope you like this little model of mine. Why, I do in fact. That's a classy paint job, and if I ever get into British stuff, I'm definitely gonna have to go with something like that. It's pretty. Next comes from SCP's Creations. I've been working on this model for a long time. I've loved the SCP Foundation community since I was little, and always watched a lot of videos on the SCP Foundation. My engine is a Thomas build that is used by NU-7 Hammer on operations where the SCP Foundation have sites that have railroad tracks and locomotives that themselves are anomalies or SCPs that are contained by the SCP Foundation. This engine I'm showing off is not a frontline engine itself, but will be one of the engines that was used on their operations as a backup unit. In my lore, I wanted the island of Sodor to be working with the SCP Foundation to contain some SCPs, but decided the idea would be kind of dumb and not make a lot of sense. So, I went for my secondary idea, where the SCP Foundation has engines that look close to the Thomas and Friends characters, but are their own locomotives and not really tied to Sodor. Man, why are you all so creative? Stop giving me ideas. In all seriousness, this is a pretty fun take on model trains. Blending hobbies and fandoms together is a joy like no other. Surprisingly, I feel like I don't see many people blending model trains with other fandoms, but maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. Next, we have Ruby H, who has a good amount to say, but not many images. This is an edit meant to show off the first completed thing on my freelance railroad, the Ravenwood Valley. It's modeled in Roblox. This shows locomotive number 328, a former Northern Pacific S10 Class 460, after being outshopped with new lettering on the tender shortly after its purchase in 1948. The model is simply a reskin of my Northern Pacific 328 model, which took roughly 6 months to complete because I tried to do as much detail as Roblox would allow. The photo doesn't show much, but it's there. There was more to this submission, but there's only so much I can say before one photo gets a little stale to show in the background of the video. Though, I must say, good lord, how are Roblox models so good? I'm curious, was this photo taken entirely within Roblox, or did you add the filter in post? Next is from Signal Box Studios. I'm sharing with you my O27 collection, my HO collection, my VHS train video collection, and my TM Gauge collection. TM Gauge uses Thomas & Friends Trackmaster and Playrail chassis and motors, along with 3D printed shells and detail parts. My TM collection consists of Betsy, a Porter saddle tank, Ironsides, a Plymouth diesel with side plates, the RGS Galloping Goose, an unfinished Thomas, a box cab, and 2 Southern Pacific diesel shells. My entire HO collection is under $250. Holy mackerel, that's quite the collection. The HO is only under $250? And, by the looks of it, this isn't even all that you have. I see those wooden Thomas characters in the corner. You can't hide those from me. Those Trackmaster 3D prints look pretty nice. Did you make those yourself? Next is from Hugo Thomas. This is Maxwell, a trying engine with a story. So, I was at a car boot sale / flea market when I found him in a box. He was green and missing his wheels. I did find them, but no motor. So I took him home and gave him a repaint. I recently gave him a coat of a darker blue paint and gave him a bell so that he can be a tram. He has a sister, but that's a story for another day. I plan to give Maxwell an RC car motor so I can run him anywhere. I also just found out he is from 1963 and only came in a train set.
Dead. Hello.
You know, I was gonna ask about that fishing line or dental flosser, most likely string on the front of the engine. What was that for? And then I remembered you said this engine isn't motorized. That's clever. Next up is JHR. Let's start with my Christmas display. It was a fun little project I made for my grandparents and their annual Christmas village. The buildings, figures, trees, and poster boards were bought at Dollar General, causing the project to be relatively cheap, and meaning if you wanted to, you could make one on your own. The blue tender engine is a work-in-progress model of Gordon from Thomas & Friends. I first got the idea when I noticed the O-scalers at my club run a lot of Thomas engines during the winter, and I figured the HO-scalers might want something similar. It was my first attempt at painting a full locomotive, and I think it went alright. So far, only the tender has lining, I may have to repaint the body, and I'm still missing a front truck. I used an AHM Pacific to make Gordon. Last thing I'd like to bring up is the Docksider switcher that I recently bought. Aside from giving it proper knuckle couplers as opposed to horn hooks, the model remains relatively unmodified from when I bought it. I just think she looks cute and I wanted to share. I'm not too sure what her job will be just yet. Oh, that Christmas village is cute. Does it run or is it just for display? I like what you've done with Gordon. To get some better lines, have you tried using masking tape to get everything nice and straight while you're painting it on? Next is from London Transit Duck. Today, I'd like to share some of my projects. The first is the blue locomotive, which you can see in one of the pictures is a Dolius Ironworks D-Class. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Its name is Welsh Frog, and it is one of my most prized engines. I still need to add a headlight, although I'm not sure where I'll find one of those. I've also got some other scales, with an ON30 Porter, and an N-gauge collection I'd like to maintain. I am mostly an N-gauge modeler. Some of the pictures show my micro layout box right as I submit this. I'm working on a Mark II, so I hope it works out. Also, the planes include an F-16C, an F-15E, and a Eurofighter Typhoon. You know, you seem to have a layout type. Most of these look like Inglenooks or the Fork, where every switch faces the same way. That's a pretty good way to do a lot of micro layouts, especially with how short the passenger trains are. Also, is that a T-gauge 3D printed engine I see? Up next is from ET Trains. This is my work-in-progress layout of the Tennessee and Southern Railway. This is a subsidiary branch of the much more well-known Southern Railway in the United States. I started this layout about a year ago, and it still has a ways to go. It's about 8 by 8 feet, with a double-track mainline and a 10-stall roundhouse. Most of the locomotives were detailed and lettered by me. I'm just getting back into HO scale. My best work, in my opinion, is Southern Railway 1256, which is a brass 10-wheeler made by United Models. Full roundhouses are such a vibe, and a surprisingly rare occurrence in the hobby. I guess most people just like adding more engines to their fleet rather than giving them all a home. Not you, though, and I envy that. For the PFM brass engine, did you paint it yourself? I'd assume so, but sometimes I've seen painted brass models before. Oh, and does it have DCC installed? I don't actually know that much about brass, but I do know that engine is nicely detailed, and I wouldn't have guessed it was brass at a first glance. Next up is Water Level Productions, who has quite the O-scale collection to share. This is the third rendition of a layout that's almost 13 years old at this point. Originally, this layout started out as just a dining room and a ping pong table. Early on, this was fine, but as my grandpa and I got more items, an expansion was necessary. He constructed over 5 pieces of custom benchwork, which brought the layout's dimensions to about 17 by 8.5 feet, which is as big as it could get in the space we have, and it's been that way since 2016. In 2020, I made a joke to my grandpa about the Lionel 250E Hiawatha sets being the same price as the Lion Chief Camelbacks. As it turns out, I got a message that just says, "Look what I got," with a picture of a 250E. This one locomotive prompted a complete redo of the track plan to accommodate the massive 72-inch curves needed to operate the engine. With 2 train operations, 13 turnouts, 10 operating track controllers, and 3 Type ZW transformers powering everything, the layout is almost done. As of the end of December 2024, nearly all the rest of the work is under the table, wiring the lights and power to the operating accessories. Good heavens, that wiring looks like something out of a horror movie set. But hey, if it works, it works. That's a blast to know your grandpa and you share a hobby. It's an experience you can't quite share with words. It's just special having a family member like that, you know? I love what you've got going on here. That was 1/4 of our submissions, 20 out of 80. If you didn't see your submission today, don't worry. We still have some work to do before we get the other parts out, but we're working on it. We'll be back in about 2 weeks to continue looking through what you guys have to share with us. Once again, thank you to DD, RPG, and KDS for the contributions towards the showcase. Thank you to everyone who submitted something for us to show off, and thank you for watching. Cheers, folks.